Do you consider yourself a people pleaser? Do you identify with being an empath? Have you ever thought that being a people pleaser is actually a form of manipulation or that being an empath is actually narcissistic? I know. When I first learned these concepts years ago, it completely shattered my belief of everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me. But the deeper I dove into it, the more I was able to step into the driver's seat and take more agency over my life and actually heal my deeper wounds and patterns. And that's what today's episode really gets into the nitty gritty of. My guest today is Dr. Nima Rahmany, and he is an attachment healing expert, speaker, author, and creator of the trigger proof methodology, a revolutionary approach to emotional regulation, shadow work, and healing at the nervous system level. For over a decade, he's helped high achieving professionals, entrepreneurs, and leaders break free from toxic cycles of codependency, repair broken trust, and create relationships rooted in deep emotional safety and polarity. Whether it's overcoming people pleasing, healing from betrayal, or navigating the anxious avoidant dance, Dr. Nima teaches his clients how to stop running from themselves so they can finally experience true intimacy, embodied self-worth, and authentic love. His work has been life-changing for men and women navigating everything from childhood wounds to separation and divorce, affairs and enmeshment. Today, he's here to share some key insights that will change the way you see yourself, your relationships, and your healing journey. Today's episode is so good. We cover the foundations of what are attachment styles. Are they fixed or are they fluid? What creates codependency and enmeshment, and the power of individuation and the ability to actually recognize your own needs, build true self-love as an armor for codependency, and to become trigger-proof by being well-resourced and well-boundaried, aka highly regulated, which you know I am all about on this channel. So buckle up. This conversation is going to be challenging, informative, and I guarantee you're going to have some light bulbs go off that will resonate with how you've experienced toxicity or dysfunctional relationships and give you some insights to move forward. Welcome to Brain Body Speak, the podcast that bridges the worlds of psychology, somatic healing, neuroscience, and energetics, as well as holistic health. I'm Holly Joy McCabe, here to help you understand complex topics by breaking them down into straightforward concepts and practical examples so you can understand your brain, your body, your nervous system, and your conscious and subconscious mind. The knowledge you'll find in this show will be your secret weapon as you learn the language of health, happiness, and success. We'll dive deep into unique perspectives on topics like mental and physical health, mindset, trauma healing, and so much more, offering you actionable tools and insights to transform each area of your life. And hey, if you're a business owner or CEO looking for all of these topics specifically catered to entrepreneurship, make sure to check out my other show, The Regulated CEO. Let's dive in. Dr. Rahmany, welcome to the Brain Body Speak podcast. I am so excited for everything that we are going to discuss today. As we were just having our pre-podcast chat, we were talking about how much we both love to have these conversations with like-minded individuals that speak the same language. And of course, this show is all about learning to speak the language of your brain, body, and nervous system. So you are the perfect guest. And we're going to dive into some really incredible topics today that you are the expert in. So before
I'm stoked.
yes, welcome to the show. And I'm so happy to have
Thank you.
Before we dive into the deep stuff, I actually go off script a little bit, and I have a out of the box question that I like to ask people.
Sure.
Just to set the stage and do a little icebreaker. What is the most interesting thing about you?
The most interesting thing about me is that in my former life, I was a professional salsa dancer. And as a chiropractor, I really felt this creative spark within me, unused and unexpressed. And so I started creating these rap songs that had to do with chiropractic and healing. And put them up on YouTube, and all of a sudden that got my name out there, and I was invited to speak on these different stages. And that's what kind of started me off in my journey as a teacher.
That is incredible. That's why I love that question so much. You hear the most interesting parts of people's stories that aren't
Mm,
necessarily in the bios.
mhm.
I love that. I also come from a music origin in a way, in a past life, I always say. So
Perfect.
I'll have to go look up those YouTube videos and theater raps. All right. So we're going to explore a lot of different concepts, the core of which are codependency, trauma bonds, and attachment styles. And I know you originally started your career in chiropractic medicine. I would love to do two things. First, if someone's brand new to those concepts, especially attachment styles, for us to give just a real basic overview of what those are, and then kind of segue into your story of how you, as a chiropractor, started to bridge the gap and make that connection
Yeah.
into going into that space.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, attachment styles are basically the way that we handle distress in relational dynamics. If I can just really sum it up, in a conflict, when conflict shows up within a relationship dynamic, we have a blueprint that was kind of handed to us in through our experiences in childhood, where we had to adapt to caregivers, where we developed a nervous system blueprint in how we deal with distress with relational attachments, attachments being relationships with our primary caregivers, parents. And so these blueprints live in our body, and we're not really consciously aware of them. And when we show up in romantic relationships or even in social interactions, when distress happens, we revert back to those old patterns that tried to keep us safe. Attachment style like the anxious attachment that really has this desire and leans into connection and really feels a great deal of stress when there is a disconnection happening. Oftentimes that style pairs like a dream slash nightmare with the avoidant attachment style, that when they experience distress within a relational dynamic, their systems have learned that expressing their emotions and feeling attuned or met emotionally was not a common experience for them. So they learn to just become an island. And when things become hectic emotionally, they kind of run off and become their own little island and deal with things on their own. And they prefer space and kind of tempo and spacing things out. And so the anxious and the avoidant are two polar opposites in the attachment style, distress kind of mechanisms, but they are like a moth to a flame joined with one another. So when you get through distress in attachment, one really wants connection, and the other one, the more connection that they want, the more distance the other one wants. So we have the pursuer and the distancer, the anxious and the avoidant. And so this dance is very painful. And we also have another attachment style called disorganized, which is like a mixture of both of them, where you want connection, but then it's scary for you. As soon as you get it, you run away. So there's the anxious, the avoidant, or called the dismissive avoidant, and then the fearful avoidant, which is called the disorganized. And all of these are like insecure ways of relating. And the goal is to really become secure in your sense of self, to experience relationships the opposite of what we would experience in codependency, which codependency is basically when your emotions, I feel responsible for your emotions. I can't have me and you at the same time. In other words, I lose myself in you. There's a lack of a boundary emotionally. And so there's a preoccupation where the word is called enmeshment, where there's no boundary between your emotions and another person's. And you take ultimate responsibility for the emotions of everybody around you. And there's a great deal of resentment from the codependent that doesn't feel like they feel seen and heard, but then they keep abandoning themselves for the sake of connection, because again, these were childhood patterns that we learned, where we are put in situations where we must abandon and betray ourselves, our sense of agency, our sense of autonomy, to then look after our caregivers. And this becomes a codependent state because, there's the codependent who is perfect match for the narcissist, who is perfectly happy just receiving and feeling entitled to having a parent look after them. So there are these two really opposing wounds from childhood of very similar wounds, which is not feeling seen. And the codependent responds to that wound by turning against themselves and merging and fusing and abandoning themselves and becoming whatever they feel they need to in order to have attachment. That's response number one. And response number two is becoming narcissistic, which is creating this false kind of sense of self, this glorified image of oneself, and needing to have others validate and to be seen in a certain way by the many. And so this narcissist and this codependent become a perfect match, moth to a flame for one another. And so there's codependent relationships, and then there's attachment styles. There's overlap, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you are anxiously attached, then you're the codependent. So there's some overlap there, but these are the ways of relating with one another that really form patterns. And it's a great place to begin to understand where your attachment style is so that you now have a baseline to work with. But it's not the end all and be all. It's not a life sentence. You can learn how to rewire your nervous system so that you can become a more secure person, a more empathic person, a more elegantly boundaried person, one who doesn't abandon themselves for the sake of connection or take complete responsibility for everybody around them, and is able to separate my pain from their pain. And so that becomes the ultimate skill that I never knew, I never learned. And it wasn't until I went through a divorce and several failed relationships through my chiropractic practice, through my chiropractic career, where I kind of was awakened to the fact that my last relationship was a codependent kind of connection. And I just stopped doing everything. I stopped working and I dove into polyvagal theory, somatic experiencing, the understanding the language of the somatics, and this concept of becoming trigger proof was born. And now I've been able to go from codependency, trauma bonds, avoidant attached type of profile in relationships to now becoming a more secure human being. It's a work in progress. And now I'm in an amazing relationship. It's our 5-year anniversary in a couple weeks. And we have a beautiful 4-year-old son. And now I left my chiropractic practice and I teach people how to become trigger proof and create secure attachments.
I love all of that so much. Thank you for the beautiful foundation for the entire conversation to build upon. I know such a complex topic with so many avenues, but to be able to condense it down to that foundational piece for people to understand is
Mm,
beautiful. And one thing that stood out to me that you said, which mirrors my belief and what I teach and talk about all the time, is it's not a life sentence. And whenever somebody asks me about attachment styles or what do you think about them or do you use them or I'm an anxious attachment, I feel like they can pathologize themselves just like they do with I'm a Virgo, so I XYZ. It's this thing
yeah.
that this innate part of them.
I'm
And
done. I can't change. It's just my sentence. I can't do anything about it.
exactly that over identification with I had XYZ in childhood, this trauma response. There's just this, let me take all of my labels and then sit with them and own them, and this is how I am, and then there's this misconception of
Yeah.
I being a healthy human, it's making sure everybody understands me perfectly. So I
Yeah.
also love when I was reading about your bio and your concepts, this trigger proof, this let's learn how to build capacity and resilience and shift these things instead of just insulating ourselves and expecting
Yeah.
the world to
To a
not
label.
and bother us. So I loved both of those things.
Yeah, and I would see that often, Holly, in my chiropractic practice. People would come in, they say, "Well, I'm a diabetic. It's genetic. It's just the way that I am." And it's like, that type 2 but diabetes is a lifestyle thing and you can change it. So healing is really a growth mindset when you understand the nervous system. And so while it's important to have a baseline of understanding where you've been up until now, to heal that, we must abandon the labels and see ourselves through the lens of the nervous system and realize that we can shift through consistency. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Absolutely. One of the things I've heard you mention in another interview that I was actually quite impressed by because I felt it took a lot of courage and confidence for you to actually share is in your state of dysfunction and these reactivity, different based realms in your
Mm.
relationships, that things had escalated to a pretty severe degree. And just to contextualize how that was showing up for you and what that was looking like in your relationship, could you share a little bit about
Yeah,
your behaviors
absolutely.
and life was like there?
Yeah, this is actually the very first thing that I share in the intro of my book that's coming out later this year. This work is the reason why this is so meaningful to me to learn is because here I am in my last relationship. Like I had been married before, we were together 6 years, and things had never really, I left and things had never really become volatile. It was just me wanting my freedom. And that divorce back in 2011 started a string of failed relationships going through the exact same codependent patterns where I was the avoidant. And it just kept getting more pronounced and more exaggerated until my latest relationship with this woman that began in 2016, which a 4-year relationship, which was the most volatile. That over a period of time, we would activate each other's woundings. Me, it was usually when I would have my events and her anxious attachment would come up, her abandonment wounds would come up, and things would escalate in our arguments to the point where I needed to leave. And she literally physically would barricade the door, which would have me knocked back into a wound, and things would get volatile. And I actually became violent. And in those moments where it was March 11th, 2018, the day that I'll never forget, that really started this, where I actually, these hands that are used to heal people as a chiropractor actually reached out in anger. And I was incredibly ashamed. I had to sit there and go, how the hell did I end up here? Number one. Number two, how do I make sure this never happens again? And number three, if I can do one and two, can I salvage this relationship, or is it better that we move on? I had to figure out, should I stay or go? And once I figured that out, can I have a healthy, secure relationship? And so I was able to do all of those. I had moved on and, huge compassion towards what my ex had to go through in that trauma bond. But essentially, once I've got through that, my karma then became my dharma. And I had to really teach people who are stuck in that really volatile, toxic, abusive dynamic that I was in, how to make sure they never end up there. Number one, to get the skills to end up there. And number two, if you find yourself there, how to build your own inner fortress so that you can actually have the courage to leave a toxic relationship. Because, as toxic as it was intoxicating, right? It was this push and pull that, most people, they know it's not healthy, but we're powerless to do anything about it. It's very much like an addiction. And so how to break that cycle and make sure that our children are not raised in a home that feels like a battlefield. We want to make it more like a sanctuary. So we're not repeating the cycles that I was raised in. So this work is very meaningful for me. It's not just a cognitive kind of like education that I got. I took courses, somatic experiencing, and all of these trainings that I had was here wasn't just here. The work actually lives in my bones, and it's very meaningful for me to teach people how to become trigger proof.
I love that. That's such a powerful testament. I feel like a lot of us in these spaces have that journey where we were desperately searching for something to bring us out of our own pain and suffering. And maybe we tried certain things or things worked, but there were still these missing gaps. And we kept drawing upon all these different experiences until these methods, I use the term, were birthed out of us because that's really what it is it permeates inside until it becomes this living, breathing work of art. And it sounds like you absolutely have that. Hey there, it's Holly Joy. Really quick, I want to take a moment of your time to tell you about something really important. You know, this show is all about diving into the science behind health, happiness, and success. And I want to tell you about something that really impacts all of us: stress. We're living in a world where stress levels are through the roof, and it's no wonder that so many of us are feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and just plain burnt out. But did you know there's a powerful, natural way to help your body handle stress better? The answer lies in a mineral you've probably heard of, but might be overlooking: magnesium. Magnesium is your body's secret weapon in the fight against stress, and it's essential for over 300 biochemical reactions in your body, including regulating your nervous system, supporting healthy sleep, and managing your stress levels. Unfortunately, most of us aren't getting nearly enough of it, and ironically, stress is the number one thing that depletes magnesium at rapid rates. So we're not getting enough, and then we're constantly stressed, losing the little we do get. And this leads to a whole host of issues: increased anxiety, trouble sleeping, and that constant feeling of being on edge are all a result of not having adequate magnesium levels. So if you're not getting enough, your body can't function optimally. And that's where 300 Zens from Zen in a Bottle really comes into play. This isn't just any magnesium supplement. It's designed to be highly absorbable without any of the junk or fillers, so that your body can actually use it to support your nervous system, calm your mind, and help you get that restful sleep you so desperately need. So if you're tired of feeling stressed out and wired, it's time to give your body the support it deserves. Start with magnesium, the number one player in the game of stress management. Head over to zeninabottle.biz and grab your bottle of 300 Zens today. Use the code BrainBodySpeak at checkout for an exclusive discount only for our listeners. Because when it comes to your health, every little bit counts, and starting with magnesium might just be the game changer you've been looking for. Remember, your brain and body deserve the best, so let's make sure they're getting it. zeninabottle.biz, and don't forget the code BrainBodySpeak to save. Stay balanced, stay zen, and we're back to the show. Thank you for sharing such vulnerability with the state of your relationship. I feel like that's not an easy thing to do, and it's easy for people to stay stuck in their shame of their past by not being able to vocalize. So do you feel like sharing your story and being able to get to that point was a big part of your method or even your own healing?
Well, it was kind of like I always wanted to teach the world. I was always, a gifted healer as a chiropractor, and I created this methodology to help people heal. And then I went through that period of toxicity in my relationship, and it blew up to the point where I had to figure out, okay, what the heck? And it was extremely shameful. There was a period of time where it was like, I don't know if I will ever work again. When people find out who I have become, why would anybody ever want to work with me? Right. And so it was one of those situations where I had to actually face it full on. Went through an entire legal process, both in family and in criminal court, came through on the other side. And it was like, yeah, this is actually like a duty for me to talk about this. Like it's my karma that's now become my dharma. I can't not talk about this, especially with people who are coming to me and describing their relational situations, their relationships where they feel like they can't have themselves and another person in a relationship. I know exactly how that feels.
Yeah.
It's when people come to me and they say, I I don't like, should I stay or should I go? Like, I know this is not healthy. Everybody has told me to get out of this relationship. Everybody has told me that this is not healthy. They hate who I've become within this relationship, but the thought of actually leaving terrifies me because which doesn't make sense because any friend that I would take out for coffee and they would describe the situation that was like mine, I'd be like, get the hell out of there. So
Yeah.
why is it that I can't leave? And I had those exact same experiences being a really intelligent guy with a lot going for me. So clearly there was something underneath the surface I was missing, and I love illuminating this. I have an event called the Overview Experience, which really exposes why, so that you have a deep understanding of why you make the choices that you do, because they're not based on any logic. If it was about logic, you would leave a situation that just didn't add up and make sense.
Right.
It didn't make sense. But there is a underlying language that's happening in the somatics, in the body, that we haven't been trained in our mindset coaching, in our talk therapies, in Tony Robbins events. They don't go into why, and that's why expanding that space between stimulus and response and becoming trigger proof is a critical component to the healing journey that most people haven't actually been taught.
You're absolutely right on, we were never taught this. And when I give talks or workshops, one of the first things I say is we were born into this world with this nervous system and this brain, this infinitely complex machine that controls our entire existence, but never given an instruction manual. And I always joke that I'm your instruction manual. I'm here to teach you. But it is so true. And I remember in my early 20s, 21, 22, right at the start of me launching my business, reading the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From
Mhm.
Venus. And that was really what started one of my obsessions with the difference between male and female psychology and physiology. And I remember reading that and thinking, why's this not what we were taught in school? This has some really good nuggets. Of course,
Yeah.
I think it's very beginner level, but it's just true that we're taught all of these things through life that are supposed to be so important and help us succeed. But we're not taught these core fundamentals on how to regulate and how to communicate and develop healthy sound attachments when it's one of the most important things that's going to be
Yeah.
interwoven into every part of our life, professionally, personally. And it's just mind blowing. So I think the more blueprints and educators and teachers and healers we can have, no matter
Mhm.
how late in life you are or how rock bottom you've gotten, the better the world and the planet will be. And it sounds like you're
100%.
absolutely doing that.
Love is the most important thing in the universe, and it's the thing that we don't really get training on, and we just go into relationships actually expecting fantasies, these
Mhm.
little kind of like love is should be like this. We understand the concept of receiving love, what love should feel like, but love as a skill, as a spiritual practice is not taught. And so I had to redefine what love was. And love, when I share this with my community, love is actually making the effort to understand someone,
Mm.
starting with yourself,
Yeah.
right? And through the nervous system is probably the polyvagal theory in the nervous system was the first kind of like blueprint that I saw that gave me a picture, gave me a
Mhm.
framework to help me understand myself. And through understanding myself, I could love myself and then others. And so you're right, we don't learn that. And so I had to learn that. So the first half of the journey, first half of life, they say, James Hollis, one of my favorite authors, says, the first half of life is a giant mistake. And so you think you figured it out, you think you have control, you realize all of these unconscious complexes are actually driving you unconsciously from childhood to try to finish up this unfinished business through our relationships. We experience a great deal of pain, which leads us on a search to find out, all right, so what am I missing here? And so I really learned how to fill those cracks in the floorboard, which is really becoming better at understanding myself, loving myself and others. And so we're summoned, that's our task in the second half of the journey.
I love that as well because one of the things that's powerful about what you just shared is learning to understand others. And I remember a long time ago, early in my professional development, having this concept, this thought of, that whole saying of the golden rule, treat other people how you would want to be treated. There's a flaw to that because we are not all the same.
Yeah.
And if my favorite
Different
cake is
values.
and somebody else hates chocolate cake or they're allergic
Mhm.
and I keep giving them chocolate cake, there's a problem with that. And
Yeah.
so that's another one of those simple references that I use that it's not about treating someone how you want to be treated.
Yeah. That's
It's
a little
about how
narcissistic, isn't it?
exactly. It's a little self-centered. It's about really learning and getting that equal balance of I understand
Mhm.
you, you understand me, and let's meet in the middle. I think that's the easiest way to simplify a healthy relationship of give and take and oscillation.
Yeah.
So that understanding is missing. It's not just the airy fairy fantasy version that you mentioned. And of
Yeah.
course, from
You can even
society.
take you can even take it further and understanding the root of someone's behavior by understanding their history, their traumas, and so when they get triggered and they react a certain way, to really make an effort to see the benevolence behind what their, you know, uninspiring behavior is, and getting to a place of understanding to it, which goes beyond forgiveness. It's like, oh, I understand. It's like one of the concepts and distinctions that I make that's really people get a little shaken up about is that when you really understand someone, you don't really need to forgive them, right? It's like, would you rather be forgiven for what you've done, or would you rather be understood? Because at the deep somatic nervous system level, all behavior is actually an attempt to regulate. Let me say that again. On a fundamental level, all behavior, whether it's anxious attachment, whether it's avoidant attachment, whether it's not speaking up your boundaries, whether it's shooting up heroin, whatever it is, whether it's physical violence,
Yeah.
all behavior is a unconscious attempt to try to regulate the system. And once you see it through the lens of the nervous system, then this concept of blaming and fault, because you start to see the intergenerational aspect of it, that the fault and the blame conversation just dissolves, and you can understand people at a fundamental level. And when you understand them, there's a shift. There's a shift in the energy when I understand you versus when I'm playing victim to whatever you're saying or doing. And so it's like a superpower. Understanding human beings becomes a superpower and helps you become a more secure person. Starting with yourself, understanding yourself is critical.
Exactly, and that was going to be my elaboration on it is in my work, one of the most fundamental things we do is exactly what you just said, help people start to understand the binge eating, the alcoholism, the insert whatever behavior you're having that you want to change isn't a moral deficit. It isn't a personality trait. It's not this fixed, again, your astrological sign. It's a response based on science, and I simplify that in a very easy to understand way. And what that triggers is compassion and understanding towards yourself. You can then release the story and all of the titles and the labels and the permeancy of that when you can actually have that deeper understanding. And I think a lot of people, when they go into couples counseling or any type of personal development, they're trying to understand others before they even understand themselves. And oftentimes that just spirals them in that blame.
Or they're
Their life.
or they're just trying to be understood.
Yeah.
Or they're going there and using the counselor as a, hey, they're trying to get they're trying to be understood by mommy, and it just
Mhm.
doesn't work. They're not leading the skills. So you nailed it.
Exactly. So we have two different directions we can kind of go here. And because we're already on the trajectory of the relationships, I'd like to just go a little deeper.
Sure. Go for it.
Let's talk about trauma bonds specifically, because I work with a lot of women who have been through a lot of abuse. I come from a background of abuse, both in childhood and relationship. And I think this concept is one of those things that's very misunderstood. There's a very superficial understanding of what a trauma bond is. I'd like to just go a little deeper on that and the anxious avoidant dance and that
Yeah.
magnetism that you mentioned at the very beginning, because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
I think in spiritual communities, it's dissected down to the empath and the narcissist. There's all these different versions of it, but at its core, we know it's what's happening in the nervous system. So let's explore a little deeper and go in deeper into the trauma
Sure.
and where those really come from and
Yeah.
hook
Absolutely.
so deeply to someone.
Absolutely. Let's break it down. It all begins in childhood with this primary wound of not feeling seen. Why? Well, because mom and dad's relationship isn't great. Mom's nervous system is dysregulated. Mom doesn't have this capacity to be able to meet the child's needs emotionally because of whatever the relational dynamic is, or she's stuck in survival mode. The child then ends up feeling not seen. And this wound of not being seen is very, very distressing to the child. So much so that they split. They react to this trauma by going one of two ways. Way number one is to create this false persona, this grandiosity, this experience of, I'm going to become so grandiose that I will always be seen and validated. That's option number one. And we call that the narcissistic kind of response. It's a trauma response. to the wound of not feeling seen. Option number one. Option number two for this wound of not feeling seen is to then create a false identity. So the first one is a false identity. Option number two is another false identity. And this false identity is to become whatever it is I need to be seen. So in other words, I will basically become a chameleon and become whatever identity I need to in order to get those needs met, which then becomes the codependent / borderline. The extreme is kind of like the borderline response. Now, here's the blind spot that's very controversial that most people don't get in the pop psychology internet world, is that that's a form of covert narcissism as well. So people who say I'm an empath, often empath is a self-proclaimed form of grandiosity. I'm not going to be too popular with the empaths by saying that, but look it up. Look up the work of Professor Sam Vaknin, who is one of the leading experts. And so this concept of the empath, what I've seen when I've worked with couples like that, is that there's an overt narcissist and the covert narcissist. The covert narcissist or codependent, and this isn't to gaslight or minimize anybody. This is just a trauma response of needing the other person's validation to feel seen. Now, the codependent wants it from the one, the narcissist wants it from the many. Okay. And we all have a little bit of both within us. Here's the other thing. We all have narcissistic parts. And the joke that I have in my community is, except me, I'm perfect. All of you have narcissistic parts except me because I'm freaking flawless. So that's the joke I love to share, right? And so what happens is this codependent and this narcissist become a perfect match for one another. And the beginning stage of the trauma bond, a trauma bond is a highly addictive, very polarizing kind of like engagement where when you meet the person, it's like your woundings match. It's like this feeling of love at first sight. It's like I've known you all my life. It's like we just met and we couldn't separate. Why? Because the wound of the narcissist begins with their fear of abandonment, begins with that, oh my gosh, you're amazing, meets the codependent and starts to pedestalize with the love bombing, right? The honeymoon phase. You're amazing. You're the most beautiful thing. You are so gorgeous. I can't believe it. I see you. I see the little girl in you. I see the little boy in you. Or that's the masculine. And the feminine is the sex bombing. You can have it with the way that you want. You can do me any way that you want. The feminine narcissist is a sex bomber, will basically give it up any which way. The masculine narcissist is love bombing, right? And so what that does in that moment, the codependent, it breaks the boundaries and finally has the codependent feeling seen. And there is a unconscious covert deal that the narcissist strikes with the codependent that says, I'm going to be the mother that you never had by seeing you, by pedestalizing you, by having you feel loved more the way that a mother should. And that lowers the defenses of the codependent. She lets him in or he takes her in. And now this love bombing phase begins with a co-pedestalizing. And the deal is that I'm going to become your mother, but you're going to also become my mother. And I'm going to make you my mother and prove that you're going to be my mother by mistreating you, by talking really horrible things and minimizing and devaluing you. And you're going to stay with me because a mother never leaves their child, right? So it's kind of like a dual mothership type of arrangement that's unconscious. Now, the trauma bond begins within about 6 months to a year or a year and a half, where a major trigger will happen in any relationship. Within 6 months to a year, there's usually one triggered event that we all must transcend in order for a relationship to thrive, is when the fantasy dissolves, when the thing that we thought about that person wasn't true. They end up having a past that we find out about. They end up having some sort of a reactionary habit that's like, ooh, that's not what I thought you were. Right. So something happens where there is a depolarization, because in the beginning, it's very polarized, this very masculine chase and this surrendered follow, and it's there. And as soon as that trigger happens, there's a depolarization where all of a sudden the pedestalization turns into, you're not what I thought you were. You are the devil. You are a villain. Like, how could you? And so a trauma bond begins with the abrupt transition from the love bombing phase to the devaluing phase. The devaluing phase, which is put downs, throwing, like put downs that could be mental abuse, physical abuse, whatever that is, it's now leaving the codependent feeling, oh my God, where is my dopamine? Where is my love bombing? Can we ever get it back? Like, can we go back to the time where you had me on a pedestal? And now, like a scientist with a rat in a cage, just dropping off these little pellets of food, the codependent is now waiting for the next breadcrumb of that of that of that dopamine, of the love bombing. And so the next phase is, after devaluing, becomes discarding. Then it's like, I'm out, I don't want to ever see you again. What once was, I can't live without you, becomes, get out of my life. And now the codependent is now going, oh my gosh, like, now having to deal with the grief of being by themselves. And what ends up happening is, as the cycle turns, the narcissist's fear of abandonment comes up when they realize the time has passed, the nervous system has now gone back into safety. And now they're dealing with the fact that they're alone and they don't have that subject anymore that gives them sex, services, narcissistic supply. It's gone. They're like, oh my God, they're looking for their supply again. Boom, triggers the fear of abandonment, which then triggers the love bombing phase. And because the codependent is so waiting for that validation, waiting to be seen, waiting because they don't love themselves, it's not actually love at first sight. It's actually love, self-love through the eyes. They finally love themselves through the external gaze of another.
Right.
And so when that comes back, now the cycle begins again. And here we are, in the cycle of abuse. The honeymoon phase begins again until the trigger happens. And the trigger knocks them back to their childhood woundings. And here's what's going on in the unconscious dance. The unconscious dance that's twisted like this is the unconscious need for both of these parties to break free from the impact of mother not meeting their needs. And so what they're doing is, these two really unfortunate, painful, tortured souls are trying to break free from the mother, the impact of mother, by using one another. And so when I figured that out, and I was like, wow, I got to learn how. I moved back in with my parents and I learned how to break free and individuate from my mother itself. And if you don't learn how to become trigger proof and break free from and individuate from your parental wounds, you get to repeat it with the next partner if you leave them. Or there are certain people that keep going through this dance, this push and pull, this anxious avoidant dance, push and pull that keeps happening for decades until their health starts to deteriorate. They get autoimmune problems, digestive issues. And the biggest fear is being seen as the bad guy and leaving. They just cannot handle being seen by, there's a tremendous amount of guilt they'll have about leaving. So they'd rather choose resentment of staying than the guilt of leaving. And it's really toxic, and people's lives get ended because of this push-pull trauma bond. And so there's a way out, luckily. And so that's kind of like an overview of the trauma bond. Tell me if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And when you mentioned Sam Batkin, as soon as you started speaking, I actually had the thought to myself, I bet he's familiar with Sam Batkin's work. I feel like he's so out of the box and so many people have not explored his work. But it's so against what, like you said, the pop psychology, the
Yeah.
oversimplification of narcissism and trauma bonds, that methodology that I learned for a long time. And when I stumbled upon Sam Batkin's work, I remember everything got turned upside down. I was
Yeah.
just blown away. And there's this
Understanding the whole dynamic got me to go, oh, that's why. That's why it's bad for you, but you still go back for more, because it's not about the other person.
right.
It's about the lack of individuation, which means becoming your true self from mommy and daddy. And growing up in a Persian household, having mother and father's approval is super important. Yet having this desire to live my own true self and my own values, and having those values and those preferences negated,
Mhm.
created this push and pull within my psyche, which
Right.
then got manifested in my relational dynamics. And as soon as I then got complete with all of that, my relationship with myself transformed, my relationship with my parents completely transformed. And that was when I could welcome a secure relationship into my life. But most people have it wrong because they're trying to do couples counseling or trying to tell their story and say who's right and who's wrong and whose fault is it, without looking deeper under the hood and realizing both of you are actually trying to act out unconscious complexes through one another. It's nobody's fault. And so I'm
Right.
really keen on educating people about that.
Absolutely. And it's such a foundational concept of, I think for a lot of people who have maybe either ventured into or are in the spiritual spaces, which I had a big, long realm in that. I went deep down spiritual studies and philosophies, and I still love a lot of that. But the most toxic component of that, where everything is an empath. And I think a lot of people find this label. When I found this probably 15, 17 years ago, I remember thinking, oh, this makes so much sense. I just deeply heal and feel everything that other people feel. First, I learned that's a trauma response, and I teach a lot of people to disconnect from that label. And then the other component is the narcissist part that you mentioned. And I think that one is a lot harder of a pill to swallow than the it's a trauma
Yeah.
response. But to
Mhm.
just break this down one more time for anyone listening and highlight this because I think it's such a critical piece. You're susceptible to the love bombing when you have this core lack of self-love. No matter how confident and successful and happy you are on the surface, when that love bombing comes around, you're not actually falling in love with that person. You're falling in love with yourself and the ways
With an
you're
idealized version of yourself to
yeah,
cope with your paralyzing insecurity, which makes
exactly.
you totally susceptible to somebody manipulating you with love bombing. Absolutely.
And it's that version, you've seen that version of yourself that you've never seen before, experiencing that, that is what puts that threshold for that dopamine. Nothing goes
Essentially, they turn
higher.
you into a narcissist.
Right. And a drug addict to that dopamine. Your dopamine threshold goes so high. And it says, this feels so intoxicating and so good to finally see myself like this
Yeah.
and finally have this validation that when that's pulled away, that's one of those
Yeah.
things that hooks in. It's not like another relationship that makes you feel, oh, he likes me and he thinks I'm pretty and we're good together. It's much, much deeper. And I think that that is really important.
That's right.
Sam Bat can ruffles a lot of feathers.
Yeah.
You're actually a narcissist. It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
form of narcissism, but I think it's really important to explore that side of it, especially because a lot of codependent women have trauma responses, trauma bonds,
Yeah.
and they have that I'm an empath. I just feel everything kind of identity inside.
Yeah. Self-love becomes the armor, right? And that empath, the narcissist is also quite empathic to the point where it's called kind of cold empathy, where they're able to assess all of your vulnerabilities and tell you exactly what they know that you need to hear because of your such uh, meager boundaries. So, there's two types of empathy. There's conscious empathy, and then there's unconscious empathy.
Yeah.
So empaths who label themselves empaths are more unconscious empathy, is because of a lack of protective boundaries around oneself. Because as a child, you have to have hypervigilance to assess and scan and track the emotions of your caregivers and be able to anticipate their needs so that you can be safe. So it was like a trauma response to have unconscious empathy, right? And that's a trauma response. So it's not something to like shout at the rooftops and celebrate. It's not, it doesn't make you grandiose, actually.
Right.
What is something to celebrate is what I call conscious empathy, where you first have the empathy towards yourself, the parts of you that you abandoned to look for safety outside of you. And once you empathize with those parts of you, you now have this ability to create a healthy, elegant boundary around your energy so that somebody else's upset, you can witness it without orienting to it.
Right.
The distinction is I can witness you and you're upset without orienting to it and becoming triggered by your upset. And that's a huge distinction that most empaths don't have and can learn if you're willing to learn the somatic skill, the skill of witnessing somebody, because you can truly help someone when you witness them, but when you orient to them, you lose yourself. And that's conscious empathy. And that's a very critical skill for us to learn. And most people have no freaking clue what the heck it is. They just suffer because they can't be around people, because being around others is exhausting because they orient to everybody's emotions. There's no protected boundaries around their energy. And
Absolutely.
that's a trauma response.
100%. And one final distinction that I always love to make with the I'm an empath component is when people tell me that, I ask them, do you pick up everybody's positive emotions or just the negative ones? I've never had someone say, oh, yeah, when I'm around someone that's really happy, I get happy and optimistic and I just, soak all of those emotions up. And that tends to be the thing that will get them thinking and understanding, oh, this is a trauma response because I'm always looking for the threat, scanning for the negative, what's dark and scary around me. And that kind of helps them switch out of that. So that's a really powerful concept and shift of the conscious empathy versus unconscious. And it reflects that a lot. So I think if people can just understand that alone, they'll start to shift the way they feel everything from everyone else. Moving on
100%.
toward another part of your framework and philosophy is this concept of a villain's journey of breaking free from the trauma bonds and codependency. And I'd love to know if you can unpack that for us and why you call it a villain's journey.
It has to do with this concept of witnessing and orienting. Most people are stuck. I ask when I'm speaking, I say, how many of you are still in a relationship right now because you know you want to leave, but you're afraid of being seen as the bad guy?
Mhm.
And especially if you created an identity of goodness, of being the good girl, the good boy, the people pleaser, your biggest fear is displeasing other people. So what'll happen is you will abandon yourself just to make sure that other people don't see you as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And in parenting, the way that looks like is, it's devastating for children when parents are afraid of being seen as the bad guy because there's no boundaries. You don't set a boundary with the child and tell my son, listen, it's 8 p.m. We're going to lay off the Paw Patrol because it's not good for you. And then I don't love you. And he turns, as a 3-year-old saying, I don't love you. Right. And all of a sudden, if I haven't worked through that, I have zero capacity to be seen as the villain in his eyes. And I go, okay, you can stay up and watch it later on. And I'm giving a very kind of like overt example, but this happens each and every day when we don't speak up. We don't share what you're experiencing. You don't leave. You don't say no because you're afraid of being seen as the bad guy. So you abandon yourself. And what happens is when you say yes, when your body says no, you create a resentment. And that resentment is turned inward first. And that inward resentment this way creates inflammation. And inflammation over a period of time creates illness. And so every single person who's a fawner, who's a people pleaser, anyone who has a chronic illness, guaranteed they are fawners. They have an unresolved fawn response because they cannot handle being seen as the bad guy in someone else's story. So they say yes when their body says no. So what
Yes.
happens is when you are not able to feel comfortable being the bad guy in someone else's view and being seen in a negative light or being criticized, you will abandon yourself, and your body then creates illness as the boundary for you.
Yeah.
So your body says no. Your body creates illness and symptomatology to be able to give you the boundaries that you are not able to give simply because you have not embraced your villain shadow side. And by integrating this villain within you, to be able to have the capacity, expand your capacity and resilience of being seen by someone as the bad guy, of having someone displeased with you, not on purpose, but sometimes when you make a stand and you tell your truth, someone's not going to like it. Someone's going to get triggered by it. Do you abandon yourself because you don't want to be seen as the bad guy? Or do you double down and say, hey, I know that's not going to make me favorable in your life, but I have to be truthful and I can't abandon myself. And so I believe that breaking free from trauma bonds and healing codependency and individuating as your authentic self, you must expand your capacity to be seen as the villain in someone's eyes.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think another interesting component to add on to that is we talked about the flip side of empathy being narcissism. Another concept that I love to flip on its head is people have this virtuous association with people pleasing. I just love to give for other people. I don't like to make people upset. But what that really is a form of manipulation because it says,
Yes,
I don't want to be uncomfortable with the way you respond if I assert a boundary. And
correct.
when we put that on its head, a lot of people
Yeah.
are like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I'm
You're
going
not
to
so
explain.
altruistic over here, sweetheart. Don't be thinking you're so altruistic with your little people please. I just want to do things for others. No, you actually can't handle if someone's displeased with you. It's just as narcissistic as it is altruistic. And so what you're talking about, Holly, is, if I may, you're talking about this duality that exists in all structures. And once we can see that we're not one side without the other, and we're able to integrate our polarities within us, we then start to live according to our power.
Yes, and that puts you in the driver's seat. I think that's one of the core concepts of me, my work, my practice, and this podcast is to have those challenging
Sovereignty.
perspective shifts of, hey, it could be, but also it's a little bit of both of this. So that duality, and I love that you're so well versed on that side because so many people love to stay on one side of the street because that feels a little easier to swallow than to look at, ooh, that's narcissistic. Ooh, I'm actually manipulating. Ooh, my codependency is attached to this chronic illness. That's tough, but it takes that courage, just like
Mm,
we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, you being able to look at your negative behaviors and the worst of the worst, those dark, shadowy parts of ourselves. If we can't go there, we can't heal. And so
yeah,
many people do this. I'll talk about my problems. They have this pseudo self awareness, but they're not actually going deep. And I think
yeah.
we share the passion of getting people to go deep into that uncomfortability and look at it and then
Mhm.
create and expand that capacity to actually heal it. So I
100%. It's that victim perpetrator dance, is that everybody sees themselves as a victim, but can you see yourself as the perpetrator in this dance in your own form? And if you can't, that's a red flag. When you can, you become a safer individual to be in a relationship with. And so it's all about awareness and learning how to take a higher level of consciousness. And I love teaching people who are ready to learn and feel all the feels of shame when they expose their unconscious parts. I love it.
absolutely. As we're tying up the ends of the conversation again, there's so many deep avenues that we could exit off of, but sticking to this relational dynamic, is there a time that you feel like you relapsed, you reverted back to an old pattern even after years of being deep into this work? And if so, how did you navigate that and how did you course correct, if you will?
Um, Revert back. Well, becoming trigger proof doesn't mean trigger less. It
Mhm.
means becoming aware and having a system to be able to bring yourself back to safety and a framework in which conflict that you've gone through, you're able to repair.
Mhm.
So, what I've managed to do on my journey is, let's say my wife and I get into conflict. We now conflicts basically we are able to repair them within a matter of minutes. We take ownership. We now are like working as a team. The people that are in my life right now, usually, I don't have people in my life, friendships and family members who aren't able to take accountability for their side and own their part of the dynamic. And so what's shifted dramatically is the speed of repair.
Yeah.
It's not that I never get triggered. That's a fantasy. It's how quickly can I bounce back and recover? My capacity to be resilient to these activations and bring myself down to safety and take a challenged relationship, you know, kind of acknowledge the breakdown and take full responsibility for my side of the street. So it's a practice, it's a skill, it's a spiritual practice that you keep getting better with, and there's no finish line with.
Agreed, and I think it's that quick course correction. I teach the same thing in my world of you're going to feel off kilter sometimes. It's not this perfect, everything's in balance and everything's in harmony at all times, but it's that capacity, that resilience to be able to shift back in without it causing all of this residual destruction. And when you don't have those deeper resources and capacity, those things spiral as this domino effect that can be catastrophic, where you're constantly just implosion, pick up the pieces, implosion, pick up the pieces. And I think so many realms of addiction go through that cycle where it's white knuckle. I can hold it together for a certain period of a time, but then it all erupts and then I start all over again to try to repair. And I think that happens especially in relationship dynamics without this deeper understanding of what's really running the show. If somebody is in a toxic cycle with a partner, they're hearing the trauma bonds, the codependency, lots of, woo, that's me. They're willing to face off with that darker, shadowy side. How do they know when it's time to walk away and when it's really just about doing the work? And do both partners need to be committed to doing the work?
Yeah.
In your opinion?
Well, I would begin with understanding your attachment style. I think in the show notes, I'll give a link so that you can have the quiz to understand what your attachment style is. So that's a really great place to start. But whenever somebody makes the decision, that's it, it's over, and they're in a state of activation, it's never really the answer because it's just a response. And so the question's got to be, what's the most loving thing for both of us? And both of you have to be in a place with an open heart. The decision must be made with an open heart, not a closed one.
Mhm.
So the best way, as the journey that I take my clients through, is really understanding, dissolving all of your resentment, learning how to regulate the nervous system, and really healing what this dynamic is really about. It's never about what it's about. And you must individuate from your mother and father. Because if you don't individuate and divorce from them, then you're going to divorce this person and then repeat the same cycle. So the work is, how do you know when it's a good time? Is you take the space. If you can't be in the same space because it's too volatile, take that space and then go inward and learn how to regulate the nervous system, learn how to trust yourself, learn how to find those parts of you that you abandoned to be in this relationship and repair with yourself. You individuate from your mother and father. You then go into understanding all of the things you're projecting. This is the process I take my clients through. Understanding all the things that you're judging and projecting onto them, you see it as a reflection of you. That's a really surprising part, so that you see that they're reflecting back to you parts of yourself that you're not aware of. And you go and you integrate those parts. And once you understand you fully and you understand them, a new conversation emerges. They are either going to, you have to let the old relationship die. You must die the old relationship. And then the new relationship is, look, we have been in a trauma bond. We've been in a codependent dynamic. It's nobody's fault. But I have a vision for a relationship where we can create a container where the relationship becomes a spiritual practice where we get to heal together, that both parties take responsibility, not blame, but responsibility for what arises. And then we work to repair what comes up so that we can heal the past together. Are you in or not? They will either rise to meet you or they won't. And you can say, I totally understand that you won't. I don't blame you. Let's be the best of friends and we both deserve something better. And I've had clients who did the work individually. We don't do couples counseling.
Mhm.
And on the other side of their 20, 30-year codependent relationship, they have a 26-year-old daughter. They finished and they both looked at each other and said, wow, it's time for us to move on. And they did a FaceTime with their daughter and they announced it to her. And she was like, I'm so proud of you both for the work that you've done. And they're like great teammates consciously uncoupling without a war. So on
Right.
the other side of the inner work, the should I stay or go answer just answers itself.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. The very result of that anxious attachment is always, I need answers. I need to know. I need to know. And people are always looking for that. That's why I asked that question. And I think your response perfectly thumbs up. Create that space and be able to sink into your own journey first. Because what I found I work with primarily women, I work with men too, but a lot of times it's the woman who's the initiator. And her initial thought is, if he doesn't do this and he doesn't do this, it's all that blame and projection. But when she gets
Control
bounded
and
and
control, which is repulsive to the masculine, by the way.
exactly, when she gets boundaried and resourced and regulated, all of a sudden everything in her orbit, her kids, her husbands, it just dissolves. All of those problems, like you said,
She becomes
problem is
magnetic.
not the problem.
Yeah.
It just goes away. And oftentimes it's not that you need him in the counseling or you need
Yeah.
service or this needs to shift. Sometimes it is, and you'll
It's an
never know until
individual
you do that
journey.
first.
Yeah. Which makes you more magnetic, which makes you, but it sounds a lot easier than it actually is because when you're anxiously attached, there is a paralyzing fear of actually taking your eyes off the other person because you're so used to orienting as a codependent to the other person. Orienting to the self feels like death. You
Right.
feel like you're going to lose everything if you just look at yourself. You're so used to orienting outward. So it sounds a lot easier. So it's wise to have a guide that's going to really walk with you in that. And the people who do it, their power just increases, their magnetism, feminine radiance goes through the roof because they're not trying to control and manipulate out there. They're going inward. So we're on
Right.
the same page.
Right. And of course, we could do a whole other episode on masculine and feminine energetics, another
Let's do it.
huge passion of mine. And I think
Let's do
it
it.
ties into this work so much. In wrapping up this episode, I want to give someone a jumping off space. Of course, we're going to put all of your resources and ways to contact you and to plug into your work. And I think that assessment is such a great tool for people to start with. But if somebody does that and they get that first information, what do you feel like is the most important pivotal step before they even start the work for them to either understand, to embody,
Yeah.
or what shift do you think needs to be made?
Probably the greatest skill to learn is how to hear feedback without getting defensive. It's probably the greatest setback, the greatest bottleneck in everyone because somebody hears criticism and they see criticism because it brings up not enough. You know, one woman I'm working with, she's like, my husband, I'm the avoidant, my husband's the anxious, and he wants more time. And I go, what do you make that mean that he wants more time with you? So that I'm not doing enough. And I'm just interesting how she doesn't see his bid for more connection as she is enough. She's taking it as a criticism. She's taking the feedback of wanting more connection as a criticism, which is because she's now regressed to the childlike state. And people have zero clue. Most human beings, unless they're able, that I've watched, are piss poor at receiving feedback without getting defensive and making it all about them and getting more curious and seeing what is it that they're wanting. And so developing the skill of being able to receive criticism without getting defensive, being able to hold all your not good enough parts and really seeing what is it that they're wanting. Geez, they're wanting more connection. That doesn't mean I'm not enough. That means that they're not getting enough. They want more. And so that one little mind virus that she's dealing with is so common and it's killing our relationships because we are piss poor at receiving feedback.
I couldn't agree more. I think that Nailed
That's
it
the first skill to
perfectly.
master, and everything in your life will change.
Exactly. So I have a signature closing question as well. And it is the collective reprogramming question, which I feel like you might have just answered, but maybe you have an elaboration or something different. If you could rewrite one subconscious belief that the world collectively hold, what would it be?
Yeah, that we're enough as we are. Just that we're enough as we are. It's like when my son was born, before he was born, and we went and did the sonograph to kind of listen for his heartbeat. Immediately when I heard his heartbeat, I just burst into tears. And I was like, oh my God, I love this thing, this little being that's alive. I'd never met him, but I'm infinitely in love with him. And then I had the next thought, and I was like, wait a second. I love him without him having to have done anything. Just for his aliveness, he is infinitely worthy of all the love in the universe. And then I had the next thought. Wait, I was once that heartbeat. So why is it? Where did I break from that infinite worthiness? And I realized that my inner work is all about loving myself that much that I'm worthy, not for all my followers, fame, money that I'm making, but just for my beingness. And that becomes the goal of the inner work that I lead people through.
Could change the world with that rewrite, huh? I am definitely
100%.
there.
Do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. I know, again, we barely scratched the surface. I'm going to list all of your links below, but what's the best place for people to connect?
The best place is the link in your show notes, and that gets the attachment style quiz, and then it gets you the results, and then you be able to keep up to date with my newsletter and my website, drnima.com.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to dive in, do the quiz, figure out that basic understanding of recognizing what attachment style you are, and take advantage of all of the resources and everything that are available so that you can start expanding your healing and your awareness around this dynamic and how it's manifesting for you. So, Dr. Nima, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely have to do a follow-up episode soon.
Oh, for sure. I'm down. Count me in. I'm always in. Thank you so much, Holly. What a wonderful interview.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye for now, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Brain Body Speak. If you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and please consider leaving a review so that more people can find the show and benefit from this content. It means the world to me. I read every single one of them, and it really encourages me to keep moving forward with this mission and this podcast. Also, tag me on Instagram at Brain Body Speak and let me know what resonated with you specifically about this episode, and you'll be entered into my monthly giveaway of a free $500 value Brain Body Reboot course. To take this journey further, visit brainbodyspeak.com for free resources and to see our complete suite of self-paced programs. If you're ready to start nourishing your brain and body today, snag something from my premium supplement line by visiting zeninabottle.biz. Remember, 300 Zens, our magnesium product, is my absolute fave and my #1 recommendation for people to get started. Until next time, remember, your transformation begins with your brain, your body, and your nervous system. And I hope you found value from this show that you can put into action today. Love and Zen. Until next time.